So I had a very interesting and strange relationship with Victor Hayden. It started strange, it stayed strange, and it got even stranger about 23 years later after we first met. I'm Mark Deutrom. I'm a musician, guitarist, composer, songwriter, and producer, and I also was a record label owner in the 1980s. And I kind of got triggered thinking about it the other day because I mistakenly called somebody named Dan Don, and when I apologized for that, he said, "No problem, I'm actually a huge Captain Beefheart fan." So anybody out there who knows about Captain Beefheart knows that his real name is Don Van Vliet. And Captain Beefheart actually had a cousin named Victor Hayden, who was known as the Mascara Snake. And I had a record label with the Mascara Snake in the 1980s. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that right now. So the record label was called Alchemy Records, and it operated in the mid-1980s in the Bay Area. And it did underground bands, hardcore stuff. We did the first Melvins record by RKL, Rich Kids on LSD, Neurosis first record. We did a record with Sacrilege and a record with Poison Idea. And that was the end of my association with Alchemy. It was short, but it was sweet. So my band, Clown Alley, played around the Bay Area, and we played a show at a place called New Method, which was an underground place in Emeryville. Lots of bands played there, Christ on Parade, Violent Coercion. Out-of-town bands would play there. I think the Melvins even played there. Greg Anderson from Southern Lord's band played there. Lots of people played there. And so I think Victor came up to us after we played, and he just went, "Wow, man, you guys this was so incredible, so high. You guys are just off the charts. This is amazing." And so I gave him our demo tape, and he said, "Hey, have you ever thought about making a record?" And I said, "Sure, all the time. We think about doing that all the time." And so he said, "Hey, let's stay in touch." And that's what we did. And we had a few conversations about just the state of the music business for underground and alternative music in the Bay Area, and how there really was a need for a local label that was signing local bands and putting out stuff of quality. So that was sort of the germination for Alchemy Records. And that's where we started. We started talking to local bands, signing them up, and making records with them. So a lot of these bands just had demo tapes, or they might have made a single or something like that. So we were listening to a lot of stuff. We were going to a lot of shows, and the bands that we liked, we would just approach them directly and say, "Hey, do you guys think you're ready to make a record?" or something of that nature. And we'd have a few meetings with them, and we'd just see where their seriousness was at. And then usually we would just start making kind of a game plan to get something worked on. So Victor came up with the idea of having a record label, and he would basically be the money guy, and I would be the person that put the stuff together, got the bands ready to go in the studio, and produced also the records. I set up a distribution deal in London through somebody who used to work at Maximum Rock and Roll, went to London, started working for Southern Distribution in London, and she hooked me up with the guy running the place. And so we had this great distribution deal. So we were able to start making records, and we made some really good ones. We made the first Melvins record, first Neurosis record, made a record with a band called RKL from Santa Barbara, made a record with a band called Poison Idea, and a metal record with a Bay Area band called Sacrilege. So all of these records were done on an extremely budget-conscious way of thinking. And I would kind of run around and try and find unused studio time at some of the better studios in San Francisco, instead of just going to small punk rock studios. We had an idea that we wanted to make really good sounding records in 24-track studios as cheaply as possible. So that's what we ended up being able to do for most of the records that came out on Alchemy. So the record started coming out, and there was a little buzz going about Alchemy in the Bay Area, a very micro buzz, but internationally there was one also because of our great distributor in London. And Victor and I started talking about maybe trying to get a club going. It was mainly Victor who came up with the idea because there was no place for alternative bands to play in San Francisco at the time. Places would be rented. Anywhere from 4 bands to 16 bands would play. There was a place called The Farm, and they would do these all-day events with bands playing. I did sound at 1 or 2 of those, which was kind of exhausting, but it was super interesting, and the community was kind of a close-knit alternative community that tolerated all kinds of music. It was really cool. There were punk bands playing with metal bands and vice versa. And there was kind of a very good feeling of solidarity. So it seemed like the next logical step for the expanding Alchemy empire was to have a club. So that's what we did. We went out and started looking at places. So while all this stuff was going on with the label, I was also playing with my band Clown Alley. And you can actually see there's a playlist on my YouTube channel of what it was like to actually be at one of these shows that Victor and I put on. And I think I pretty much have got the whole gig up there now. So take a look at that and you'll get the flavor of what it was like to be at an underground show in the mid-80s in San Francisco. When Victor and I went out and started looking at places, we looked at all kinds of places. One of the places that we looked at was a place in the East Bay, and the address was 928 Gilman Street. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it was the actual building that became the famous Gilman Street project, or whatever it ended up being called. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, Gilman Street became sort of ground zero for all things punk and alternative in San Francisco through the 80s and 90s, I believe. I'm not sure exactly how long it lasted, but I think Green Day came out of there, and some other bands that I'm probably not familiar with, but maybe you can let me know who those bands are. Anyway, Victor and I went and looked at it, and just to bring the place up to code was going to cost a lot of money. So we did not have that kind of revenue at hand. So we went to Tim Yohannan, who was the editor and owner of Maximum Rock and Roll magazine, and told him about it. Because we knew that he was looking to do the same sort of thing we were, was interested in opening a Maximum Rock and Roll type of club or something. We went to a couple of early meetings at Gilman Street, and we sort of disagreed with some of the ideological stuff that was happening there, so we decided to not get involved, and Gilman Street went on and did whatever it did, which was become pretty much a world famous mecca for everybody traveling around who wanted to play there eventually. So the club didn't work out, but we still had plenty of bands who were interested in being on Alchemy Records. One of my mistakes at Alchemy was not to sign the band NoFX, who really wanted to be on the label. But they were just terrible at the time. They were terrible. So they eventually did get great and formed their own record label. So who knows, maybe my decision created that whole thing for them. And Mike, you're great now, your band's great. Everything was, NoFX became the NoFX I always wanted them to be, so. So things were running smoothly. We had a lot of interest. And John Loder in London asked me if I wanted to come to London to produce a band called Raw Power from Italy. And I said, sure, I'd love to come over and do that, which I did. I was in London for a couple of weeks doing this record with them. And then when I came back from London, my phone machine was filled with all of these confused messages from every single band on the label saying what's going on with the label, and you know, they were basically extremely confused. And it turned out that in my absence, Victor had come to the conclusion that me and the distributor of our label had hatched some kind of plot to steal the record label from Victor. So while a lot of people were not exactly saying this to me, after talking to 4 or 5 people in different bands, I was able to basically figure this out. And I asked Victor about this. He wasn't answering his phone for the longest time. When he did answer the phone, he said, yeah, you know, I don't know what you're doing, but we're going to have to make some big changes here. And I've got a lawyer and you need to get one too. And the whole thing just disintegrated in the space of a phone call. And I was sad about that. And I was concerned about Victor also, because he just sounded like he had a break from reality. I knew that Victor had on occasion indulged in Ritalin pretty heavily, which is a pharmaceutical stimulant. It's a legal prescription drug, but he'd offered that to me on numerous occasions. And then I think that this is probably what started affecting his mind. Maybe that lack of sleep and a variety of other things. I have no idea. So upon my return from London, I found myself without a record company and with a guy who was completely paranoid, and that's where it ended. And so I didn't have enough money to get a lawyer. Victor lawyered up, and we got to the point where basically the only asset that I had in the label was what I'd invested as far as producing all the records and everything, which was judged to be of zero value. So we came to some agreement where Victor was going to pay me a certain amount of money and I was going to say goodbye. When it came down to actually settling that, Victor had his lawyer pull out a promissory note and a really small amount of cash and just go, this is what you get, or you get nothing, or you can go get a lawyer and we can go round and round. So I took that, and sometime later, due to a variety of other things, I ended up moving to London, and I completely forgot about Victor and Alchemy. So Victor was a super interesting guy, and we had art and music and film in common, and we would have a lot of in-depth conversations about all of this stuff. He could talk forever about all kinds of stuff. And we would discuss film quite a bit, and we had a lot of the same music taste. We liked kind of the more fringe jazz people like Ornette Coleman and Eric Dolphy and stuff like that. And Victor also liked underground punk stuff and really strange things like Pere Ubu. And he also appreciated just big stuff that was going on too. I mean, he kind of even weirdly liked things like ZZ Top, which was kind of interesting. Victor was hilarious. He had a very dry, weird sense of humor. So that's something we had in common also. We could have a lot of inside jokes running all the time about all kinds of stuff and find humor in everything from politics to just the kind of cars that people drove. Incidentally, Victor drove a Volvo station wagon, and he claimed it was the most inconspicuous, unnoticeable car ever. So it was perfect for him to just drive in secrecy, completely unknown by the world at large. Victor had a thing about secrecy. He just loved it. He claimed to have never had a driver's license or social security number or any kind of employment, or he was just completely mysterious. So Victor was an older guy. He was 10 years older than me. And so he was definitely old for the punk scene and the underground music scene in San Francisco. I thought I was old. I was like 26, 27. And so he was definitely, there's an older man standing around in here all dressed in black with dark sunglasses on. Once I got to know him though, I mean, he was definitely one of the wackiest people I knew, and when he liked something, he was all in on it. No girlfriend, no boyfriend that I knew of. He was just utterly mysterious. It was like my life is just, you know, not available in any way, shape, or form. But it is interesting that once Don Van Vliet died, then Victor came out with the Mascara snake stuff. He didn't have a lot of close friends, so he kept a lot of people at arm's length, you know. And I think I was one of the people who could really get in there. I went to his place a couple of times. And I think it was a converted garage. And that's where the song Victor's Closet came from, because I looked in his closet. I was just kind of, he was so mysterious. I was like, I'm going to look in this guy's closet. And I already knew him by that point. So yeah, there it was. I mean, just basically 4 sets of clothes exactly the same. So kind of like Eric Satie, how he had, Eric Satie, the French composer, had like 10 gray velvet suits.
Or Steve Jobs.
Or Steve Jobs, yeah. To his credit, all the records that we did are great sounding records, and they're cool, and they've sort of become established as classics on some level. And Victor is the one who got the Melvins on the label. He went up to Washington. He had some kind of connections or knew people in Seattle, and Melvins got on his radar, and he came back and told me about him and had a record or something, and we listened to it, and he was going, "What do you think?" He was real excited about it. And I said, "Yeah, this sounds pretty good. You know, let's talk to them and see if they want to do it." So it was another good timing thing. But the Melvins did stay with Victor when they came to do the record. And Lori was kind of wanting him to stay with us, and I was just going, I don't know these guys. I don't want them staying in my house. I don't know them. You know, so that's why they didn't stay with us. And Victor said, "Oh, they can stay with us," which I was he said, "They can stay with me." I was very surprised by that. But I think he was just such a fan that he was willing to take the risk of having them stay there. And I think they were well behaved, mainly. Victor was an artist, and he did some manipulations for the Gluey Porch Treatments album by the Melvins, decorated that up a little bit. He did the art for the Clown Alley record, Circus of Chaos, and I think he did the art for the Poison Idea record also, possibly even the Neurosis one. And he also did a Captain Beefheart album cover, which was the album Blue Jeans and Moonbeams. So check that out. So Victor definitely had an interesting style that was all his own, and he also kind of suffered under the weight of art history. We would have a lot of conversations about just the torment of being artists and what it's like to drag that burden around, and how people who are less aware are almost kind of gifted by that because they don't have the burden of art history. So he was very much attuned to everything that came before, and I think that was kind of a little bit disabling for him in his own artwork. But the stuff that he made is cool, and it's out there and you can find it. I lived in London from 1988 until 2000 or 2001. Didn't think a whole lot about Alchemy. Every once in a while, one of the records would get reissued, and so that would get on my radar a little bit, but there was nothing in it for me. I didn't care or think about it, and I didn't care or think about Victor at all. So fast forward 23 years to 2011. I'm living in a mixed-use building on the east side of Austin, downtown, with my wife, and I go down in the elevator. There's a bulletin board in the hallway, and on the bulletin board it says the Mascara Snake is having an exhibition at the gallery in my building. And this was pretty strange to me because first of all, I had no idea that Victor was actually the Mascara snake. The only way I found out was about 6 months previous to that. I'd bought this Captain Beefheart box set called Grow Fins on Revenant Records, and I decided I was going to read the entire book, which came in the box set, which was about 110 pages long or something. And in it was the Mascara snake, Victor Hayden, and this whole thing about him and Dom Van Vliet and how they grew up as children and stuff like that. And so when I saw the Mascara snake was going to be in my building, it was quite incredible. I couldn't believe it at all. I mean, it was just, I went upstairs and told my wife, and the first thing she did, of course, was be scared of how I was going to react to it and what I was going to do. But I was just laughing at the absurdity of just, after all this time, Victor being deposited in the very building where I lived. And so I think it was maybe a week and a half away or something like that. And I couldn't stop thinking about it the whole time. I had all these plans about what was going to happen, what I was going to say to him, because he still owed me a lot of money that he completely just walked on. He didn't honor his promissory note. I was actually surprised that the check for $2,000 or something didn't bounce. But it was a large amount of money to me at the time in the 80s. Anyway, so I knew the guy who was the owner of the gallery. He was a neighbor of mine. And I said, so you're going to put on this Mascara snake show? And he was going, oh yeah, this is going to be just fantastic. It's his first solo show in I don't know how many years it was or whatever. And so I started telling him a little bit about my relationship with Victor, and he started getting this kind of frightened look on his face. And I said, hey, don't, you're my neighbor. I like you. I'm not going to pull any kind of weirdness to jeopardize what you're doing here. And, that's it. Don't have any, but I am going to go and talk to him, I said, which still made him nervous. He probably stayed nervous up until the show opened or whatever. And I said, I'm not even going to go to the opening. I'm just going to go down and see him and have a couple of words with him. So the day showed up. I was thinking about it all day, what I was going to do. And really just nothing seemed like the right thing to do. I just had no idea how to talk to him exactly. And so I figured I'd wait about 2 hours before the doors were going to open. And so I went down there, and he was there with with a couple of people that came with him from, I don't know where he was living, the Bay Area or Seattle, somewhere like that. And I saw him sitting there, and he was all dressed. He was dressed exactly the same way he used to dress in the 80s, which was ridiculous. I mean, I never saw him wear anything else except for kind of, black chinos, a black jacket, a black t-shirt, and sunglasses, prescription sunglasses all the time. That's the only thing I ever saw him in. And I actually wrote a song called Victor's Closet, which was about how he just dressed like that. It's on my record, The Value of Decay. Anyway, I walked in there, and it was like I was on autopilot, and I just said, Victor! And people were just kind of going like this. There was these people just making sure everything was okay. And people were murmuring a little bit, and I saw him kind of go like this, and I go, yeah, Victor! And he went, I started walking towards him, and I had kind of a big beard at the time, and he wasn't recognizing me at all. And I walked up to him and I go, don't you recognize me? It's me, Victor, it's me. And he was kind of going, excuse me, sir, I don't believe I've met you. And I was going, oh yeah, we've met. I go, it's Mark Deutrom. And he just looked at me and he went, Mark, how have you been? And I go, well, I've been pretty pissed, to tell you the truth. And I'd be a lot better if you gave me the money you owed me. And he just went, well, I mean, he was pretty much speechless, and people were starting to get really nervous around him and going, excuse me, what gives you the right to come in here and talk to Mr. Hayden that way. And I just started laughing at people, and I went, I just said, "You've been delivered unto me." I go, "I live in this building, and here you are." And he just was speechless pretty much. And I was kind of speechless too. And my brain I just had brain lock. I couldn't think of anything to say, but somehow it seemed like "you've been delivered unto me" was the best thing that I could say to him. And then I just walked out, and I was literally kind of shaking, and I just was like, what even happened then? It was like this rip in the space-time continuum where, okay, we're going to put this guy here now for you to take a look at. And so that was it. Oh, and I did tell him, I go, "Don't come back to Texas." Was the other ridiculous thing I said to him. Like, I don't even know why I said it. So, but it seemed appropriate after "you've been delivered unto me," like a Cormac McCarthy line or something. In my brain lock, all I could think of was to just kind of screw with Victor a little bit by saying this sort of stuff. That was the sort of shred of logic that still remained that I could grab onto. It was just kind of like, I'm just, okay, I got that out of my system. I'm just having a little fun now. But I'm actually standing in a room with 12 or 13 people who are afraid of me. So I'm just going to waltz out of here, which is exactly what I did. Okay, so let's fast forward again, 7 years. Now it's 2018, and I've got a band that I'm playing around town and stuff. And I'm playing the song "Victor's Closet." My band has a gig. We're playing a gig on December 7th, 2018. And we're playing the song "Victor's Closet" because it's a really fun song to play. You should listen to it on Spotify or buy my record, "The Value of Decay," and you can hear it also. So we go and play the show. We play "Victor's Closet." And then about 3 or 4 days later, I see a blurb on maybe Facebook or somewhere that the Mascara snake, Victor Hayden, has passed away. I guess Victor was hit by a van in a traffic accident in Seattle. And I thought it was a very ignoble end for him. And it actually made me kind of sad to think about it, because I did really like Victor, and we had a lot of great conversations about art and music, and talked in depth about all that kind of stuff. And he told me about going to see Coltrane and Eric Dolphy when he lived in LA. And so the strange thing is that when I was reading the kind of obits or the memorials that people were writing about him, I realized that he actually died on December 7th. So he died on the very day that my band was playing a song that I wrote about him, which is crazy. And it just shows that there was some sort of weird cosmic looping still happening. One of the directors we used to talk about was Visconti. He loved Luchino Visconti movies, and there was a movie called Death in Venice. And there's a scene in the movie where it's about this composer who goes to Venice, and Venice has the plague or whatever. And there's this kind of protracted death scene where this guy is in a beach chair, and he's gotten his hair dyed, and he's got all this makeup on because he's trying to make himself extra attractive for somebody he's attracted to. And he's sitting there in this sweltering sun, and this hair dye is just dripping down his face, and the makeup's kind of melting. And Victor would always say, "Man, when I die, I want to go out like Aschenbach. Like, that would be the best way to go out." So I'm sorry you didn't get there, Victor, but that image of him being like Aschenbach is kind of a cool thing. So that's the end of my tale with Victor Hayden. And I wouldn't be surprised if he pops up again out of the space-time continuum in some way.